Chapter 9 the Cobbler of Vitebsk. The Scholar Who Became a Cobbler. Avram Yitzchak was born in Vitebsk, where his father, whose name was David Leib, earned his living as a cobbler. For a long time, Avram Yitzchak believed that his father was just a simple cobbler, but later he discovered that he was in fact a mystic, who lived a simple life purposefully to show others by example that they too could live thus. David Leib had come from Minsk and was the son of the Dayan of Minsk, Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh, who was famed far and wide for his wealth of learning and righteousness. It was therefore only to be expected that the son of such a great personality should be no ordinary person, and David Leib was in reality a scholar of achievement. David Leib saw how his father, the famous Dayan, devoted much of his time to metaphysics, and became eager to follow his example. His father, however, discouraged him, telling him he was still far too young for such study, and would be better occupied in devoting his time to the study of Shas and Poskim. David Leib attended a yeshiva, and his father watched his progress with satisfaction, for, respecting his father's wishes, he concentrated on the study of Gemara and made excellent progress. Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh supervised his son's studies right up to the time of his marriage to the daughter of the wealthy citizen Chaim of Vitebsk, who promised David Leib he would provide his living costs for 8 years so that he could continue with his studies. Feeling he was now ripe for entering into the vast field of metaphysics, David Leib was eager to begin, yet although he was by now 22 years old, he still had a feeling that he ought to talk the matter over with his father, who had always supervised his studies. But Vitebsk was a long way from Minsk, and there seemed no likelihood of arranging a meeting in the immediate future. Eventually, David Leib decided he could not possibly wait any longer and delved into the study of metaphysics with his whole heart. He found it all so fascinating that he suddenly realized that he was neglecting the study of Talmud, and he reproached himself for it, deciding he ought rather to turn to his studies which would improve his character. This led him to the study of ethics, and he found himself in a new world. These books on ethics made such an impression on him that he felt he must devote every minute to the study of them and leave everything else. He began to live differently, more earnestly, seeking only that which he felt would elevate him to a higher plane, but he did not want it to be noted. So he became very reserved and hid his new ideas and way of life as far as possible, even from his parents-in-law. They, in turn, began to ask him why he showed no inclination to becoming a rabbi, for, anticipating that that would be the culmination of his years of study, they had in fact already been boastfully talking to their friends about their son-in-law's certainty of becoming a great rabbi. David Leib just shrugged his shoulders and said he was sorry to disappoint them, but he did not intend to accepting any post as rabbi. His parents-in-law were taken completely aback. Not become a rabbi, his mother-in-law burst out angrily. What else do you think you'll be good for? Isn't that what you've been studying for all your life? Well, as there are still another 3 years left of the 8 years maintenance you promised me, replied David Leib quietly. Need we discuss the matter now? From that time onward, his mother-in-law did everything to make his life a misery, and feeling that their disappointment was understandable, he decided to have a talk with his parents-in-law. When a suitable opportunity occurred, he explained to them that he himself was quite determined in pursuing the life he meant to lead, but as it would not be fair to his wife and his parents-in-law to continue to incur their displeasure by his way of life, which was contrary to their ideas, he would be ready to give his wife a freedom by divorcing her, and as there were no children of the marriage, she could easily remarry and choose someone who would make her more happy. When his wife heard of his suggestion, she was very upset and said she couldn't think of a divorce, for she loved her husband dearly, and whatever he did was right in her eyes. David Leib could not feel comfortable in the house of his parents-in-law, who at every turn lectured him on his apparent lack of interest in thinking of a career for his future. This led him to shrink into himself even more than he had previously. 6 years after his marriage, his wife gave birth to a daughter, and a year later to a son, whom they named Avraham Yitzchak. David Leib's parents-in-law now lost their patience with their son-in-law completely. Look here, David Leib, they said to him. You are now the father of 2 children. Surely you will now accept a rabbinical post to support your family. We have fulfilled our part as promised and kept you for the 8 years. I'm sorry to disappoint you, he answered them, but I am still determined not to become a rabbi. And to their surprise, he continued, You need not worry, though, for I have been learning how to become a cobbler. I have already rented a suitable house and workshop on the outskirts of the town, where I shall take my family and trouble you no more. His mother in law barely recovered her speech and positively screamed at him, So you want to make a laughing stock out of us, do you? If we wanted a cobbler as a son in law, we need not have gone to the expense of supporting you for 8 years. We could have had our daughter marry a cobbler at the beginning and saved ourselves much heartache and money. You must give our daughter a divorce so that our shame be wiped out, roared the father in law. And have I no say in the matter? Interrupted their daughter. As far as I am concerned, whatever David Leib chooses to do, I'm with him. Seeing they could achieve nothing with their son in law, nor with their own daughter, they decided the matter was serious enough for them to summon their mechutin, the Dayan of Minsk, Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh, and see if he could use his influence to persuade his son to give up his crazy decision to become a cobbler and take up the more honorable profession of rabbi instead. They shuddered to think that even Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh might not be able to prevail upon his son to give up his cobbling. How would they ever be able to look their friends in the face? When the news got around that the famous Dayan of Minsk, Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh, was coming on a visit to Vitebsk, everyone became busy. A reception committee was formed, and all the big people in the community came together to discuss how best to receive so distinguished a guest. Of course, it was agreed that David Leib's parents-in-law had the first claim on being the host of the Dayan. They then chose delegates who were to meet Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh a few stations before Vitebsk, so that they could escort him in a fitting manner into the town. As the day of the arrival of the great man drew near, the excitement waxed intense. David Leib also heard the news and of the arrangements made for the representatives of the community to go out to meet his father. So he decided he must speak to his father before anyone else, and quietly leaving the town, set off for Ostrovono, where he intended to look out for his father. He had not seen his father during all the 8 years he had been married, but he recognized his father without difficulty. David Leib, however, had changed considerably during this time. He had grown older and more manly, and he saw that his father did not know him as he went towards him. He made up his mind that he would not disclose his identity for the present. He therefore greeted Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh very respectfully, but with some reserve, as one who had come to pay his respects to a distinguished personality. They immediately found themselves discussing all sorts of matters from the Gemara and Rambam, and the Dayan was greatly impressed with the depth of learning shown by this admirable young man. There seemed something familiar about him to the Dayan, that he could not quite place him. He asked David Leib where he had come from and what was his occupation, to which David Leib replied that he was one of the cobblers of Vitebsk. Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh spent all day in Ostrovono, and David Leib spent much of it with him. When David Leib heard that the Dayan intended to proceed on his journey that evening, he begged him to stay in Ostrovono overnight, as he had something of great importance to discuss with him. The Dayan agreed, and then David Leib turned to him, saying, My dear father, I did not want you to be prejudiced in my favor while we were discussing Torah matters, but now you know that I am your son, and that I came to tell you the real reason why my parents-in-law have invited you to Vitebsk. Father and son embraced each other warmly, while David Leib continued. They want to tell you that I have brought disgrace upon them because I have chosen to make my living by cobbling. But I want you to know that I have come to the conclusion that I can best serve God and my fellow Jews by living simply as a cobbler, and that is the path I intend to follow. My dear wife is in complete agreement with all I am doing, but her parents are disappointed and furious with me, and cannot see anything but shame in my way of life. My dear son, said the Dayan, I am proud of your courage and determination to follow the path you know to be right, even though it will bring you neither wealth nor fame. May the Almighty help you in all you do. David Leib asked his father not to let anyone know that he was such a lamdan, as he would rather they looked upon him just as an honest cobbler. His father readily promised, and after that they spent the rest of the night studying Torah together. Early next morning they both went to Shul together to daven, and after breakfast set off together for Vitebsk. David Leib only accompanied his father a little way, however, for he knew that of the reception committee, which had sent delegates to meet his father and bring him into Vitebsk with all due ceremony. And so they parted for the moment, and David Leib followed on later, arriving in Vitebsk soon after his father. After the official reception welcome, the Dayan was taken to the house of his Mechutanim, the parents-in-law of his son, where all the heads of the community were assembled to do him honor. When the guests had all departed and Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh and his son found themselves alone with his parents-in-law, the latter turned to their Mechutin and began to pour out their troubles and complaints. To think that we should be put to shame by a son of yours! You, who are the famous Dayan of Minsk, can surely not approve of your son stooping so low as to become a cobbler. Can you understand our feelings? We are positively ashamed to look our friends in the face. My dear Mechutanim, replied the Dayan mildly, the night is not a time for judgment. Let us retire peacefully and leave the discussion for the morning. Next morning, at the first opportunity, David Leib's parents-in-law brought up the matter again. Why are you so disturbed and aggravated that your son-in-law should learn his living by the toil of his hands? Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh asked them. You know there is no shame in honest labor. On the contrary, our sages say, love work rather than the rabbinate. David Leib is absolutely following their teaching. Surely you know that many of our Tanaim Amoraim earned their living by manual labor and did not consider it beneath them to become ordinary tailors, cobblers, woodcutters, and so on. I cannot see why you are making such a fuss about the matter and feeling ashamed. In my opinion, you ought to be proud of it. We must think about it, replied Chaim, the Mechutin, reluctant to give in as yet. And meanwhile, he continued, David Leib ought to come back and make his home with us again. But of course, he added hurriedly, he will have to do his cobbling elsewhere, somewhere outside the town. Rabbi Tzvi Aryeh stayed in Vitebsk for about 5 weeks, and his Mechutanim complained no more to him as they realized it was useless. During this time, he observed how his son carried on his cobbling, taking every opportunity of befriending his customers and showing a sympathetic interest in their affairs and problems, but always appearing as nothing more than an ordinary, kind, honest cobbler. Every evening, father and son spent their time in study, and David Leib told his father he would like to take advantage of this opportunity to study metaphysics. His father gladly agreed, and when he eventually left Vitebsk, he felt his visit had been very worthwhile indeed, and was very happy with his son's conduct and way of life. For 2 more years, David Leib and his family lived at the home of his parents-in-law, though insisting he would only do so on condition they accepted payment. This they did, but still, it was far from a happy arrangement. They could never hide the fact of their disappointment in their son-in-law, so, when one day a customer suggested to David Leib that he come to his hometown, Hatinka, near Kalishk, where he assured him he would make a very comfortable living, the idea rather appealed to him. He talked the matter over with his wife, and she readily agreed with him. She was a devoted wife and mother, thought the world of her husband, and all he did seemed perfect in her eyes. You know, dear wife, he said, I feel that this would be an excellent solution to our problems. We could live unhampered according to our ideas, and your parents would no longer be troubled by our undesirable, as they see it, way of living. The plan being approved all around, David Leib took his wife and family and made their way to Atinka, a small village of some 40 Jewish families. The villagers appealed to David Leib very much. They seemed to be good, honest people, happy in their simple life, and ready to do good where they could and be friendly to all. They gave David Leib and his wife a friendly welcome, and when he saw that they were just ordinary people with no pretensions to education, he felt safe. There was no one to recognize in him the great scholar and mystic that he was, and he felt a glow of satisfaction at the thought that here at last he would be able to live the life he yearned for, a life of simplicity and of unobtrusive help for his beloved brethren. David Leib settled down in Atinka without difficulty. He worked to his best and satisfied all his customers by his desire to please them. He charged them the very minimum, yet his work was of the best. In addition, he made friends with everybody, and they appreciated his genuine interest in their welfare. Thus he lived happily for 5 years, working by day and studying into the night, but no one knew about his secret studies. All they saw of his desire to learn was when they saw him at the Ein Yaakov shir in the base of Medrash, where we sat and listened in no way different from the other simple villagers. But although David Leib was so careful to hide his own identity from others, he, on the other hand, kept his eyes and ears open, constantly on the lookout for other mystics who might be passing through the town. It occurred to him that there might even be a mystic in Atinka itself, who could have chosen to settle there for the very same reasons as himself. So David Labe kept a watchful eye on everybody, resident or visitor, and at the slightest suspicion that he was confronting anyone out of the ordinary, he would put some leading question to the person and see what the reaction was when so questioned. Very often he would be met with a blank stare as if he asked something incomprehensible. The person would scratch his head in seeming bewilderment, saying, "What does the fellow want of me? He would do better to ask a scholar." The onlookers would laugh, saying, "Our friend the cobbler has knocked a nail in the wrong place." But David Labe could see better if he had knocked a nail in the right or wrong place. When he felt that he had really found someone whom he believed to be a fellow mystic, he pestered him with questions until he verified his guess. In order that he might be more easily have the possibility of meeting and recognizing these mystics, he made his house a guest house for wayfarers. He was additionally glad to have the opportunity of caring for the comfort and welfare of possible mystics who, being anxious to hide their greatness from people, were generally taken to be ordinary travelers and granted no special attention or privileges. In this way, David Lay made the acquaintance of quite a number of mystics, some of whom passed but once through Artsinka, and to whom David Lay was so happy to act as host. Others came again and again, and with these, David Lay became very friendly and took the opportunity to learn all he could of their special methods of approach to their fellow Jews and of the way of life regarding themselves.